In July of 1918, the Bolsheviks killed the Romanov family in a basement, in a house, in a city built on top of something they didn't understand. You know the execution. Everyone knows the execution. What nobody talks about is what the demolition crews found when they broke through the floor, 48 hours later. The lead engineer was gone, transferred to a posting so remote it doesn't appear on standard Soviet administrative maps. The site was sealed. 40 tons of concrete poured into the eastern foundation, and the official record said nothing was ever found. This is the story of what they buried, under Yekaterinburg in 1918, and why the ground there still isn't right. The Ipatiev House was built in 1883, a merchant's mansion, 2 stories, white stone, sitting on a raised section of bedrock at the edge of the old city. The merchant chose that plot for one reason: solid ground, high elevation, good foundation. That's why the Bolsheviks chose it too. When they needed somewhere secure to hold a royal family, you want solid ground under your feet, when you're doing something that can never be undone. Except the ground wasn't solid, and someone, long before 1883, had known exactly what was underneath it. The Ural Mountains are among the oldest formations on this planet. Not violent peaks, not fresh geology. Ancient ridges, ground down by hundreds of millions of years into long, worn spines of exposed stone. Geologists have studied them since the 1700s, and for that entire time, there has been a category of finding in Ural survey work that gets noted, gets filed, and never gets explained. Internal cavities, smooth-walled, geometrically regular, with floor surfaces level to tolerances that water erosion does not produce. Not caves, not mine shafts, not anything that fits the standard geological vocabulary. Just rooms, inside the mountain. In 1841, a German mining expedition operating under Tsar Nicholas I's Geological Survey found one of these cavities, near what would later become central Yekaterinburg. Their report described a chamber roughly 12 meters across, circular, walls that appeared polished, not by water, not by wind, by something they could not name. The floor was level, to within half a centimeter, across its entire surface. They measured it 3 times, because they didn't believe the first measurement. Then they closed the report, filed it, and went back to looking for iron ore. 77 years later, in August of 1918, the Bolshevik demolition crew arrived at the Ipatiev House with orders: level the structure, burn what burns, salt the memory. The Romanovs had been dead for 3 weeks, their bodies already moved, already becoming myth. The house itself was the last thing left, the last physical evidence of what had happened there, and Moscow wanted it gone. So the crew started on the eastern foundation, pickaxes into stone, standard demolition, routine work, until the stone gave way. And beneath it, there was air. The chamber was approximately 9 meters across, circular. The walls were smooth, the floor was level. The lead engineer on site, a man whose name appears in the partial Soviet Interior Ministry files, declassified in 1994, wrote his emergency report to Moscow within 6 hours. The translation reads, "The chamber beneath foundation block E is not natural in origin. The walls exhibit surface treatment inconsistent with any known geological process. The geometry is intentional. There are markings. There is infrastructure. This did not come from the earth. This was placed inside it." Infrastructure. He used the word infrastructure, in a basement, in the Urals, in 1918. Moscow responded in less than 12 hours. Seal the chamber, clear the crew, file nothing further. The engineer was transferred within the week to a surveying post in the Siberian interior, so remote that his name vanishes from Soviet professional records entirely after September 1918. Not arrested, not executed, just moved to somewhere the questions couldn't follow him. The most detailed account of what was inside that chamber doesn't come from the official record. It comes from a letter written by a 23-year-old junior surveyor named Vasily Osin, who was part of the original demolition crew, who was nobody important, which is exactly why they didn't think to stop him from writing home. The letter was recovered in 2003 by a historian working through the Yeltsin Presidential Library Archive, dated September 3, 1918. Osin described the walls. He said they were covered in lines, not carvings, not paintings, lines, geometric, interlocking, running from the floor to the ceiling without interruption. And then he wrote something that has stayed with every researcher who has read this letter. He wrote that the lines appeared to continue behind the stone, as if the wall was only a surface, and the pattern beneath it was still going, still going. He described the floor, a central depression, circular, roughly 2 meters across, with a raised rim of darker stone around its edge. He said it looked like a drain that had been sealed from below. Sealed from below, not blocked from above, not filled in. Sealed from underneath. He described passages, 2 of them, extending from the chamber walls into the surrounding rock. Before the engineers sent everyone else out, before the crew was cleared, he had just enough time to see that the chamber wasn't alone. It was connected to something, deeper. And then he wrote about the air. He said the air inside the chamber was different, not cold, not stale, not the dead air of a sealed underground space. He searched for the word. You can see the crossouts in the original letter. 3 attempts at the same thought. The word he finally settled on was intentional. He said the air felt intentional, like air that had been kept there, like a room that had been waiting. A room that had been waiting. Vasily Osin lived until 1951. He survived the revolution, the Civil War, 2 world wars, Stalin. He wrote letters home for 30 more years after September 1918. He never mentioned the chamber again. Not once. Not to deny it, not to confirm it, not to wonder about it out loud. He wrote about his work, his meals, the weather, the way all men write when they are trying to live quietly. Some things you see, that you carry differently than other things. Some things you write down once, fold into an envelope, send to your mother, and then spend the rest of your life, walking carefully around the memory. In 1979, a Soviet geological survey team conducting deep-bore sampling in the eastern Ural Plateau struck an anomaly. At 340 meters below the surface, the bore sample came back contaminated, not with minerals, not with groundwater. The Moscow laboratory report described the material as a processed stone composite of unknown origin, high silicate content, uniform internal structure, inconsistent with natural formation, processed, composite, unknown origin. At 340 meters, in the same geological column that runs directly beneath the old Ipatiev House site, the bore site was immediately reclassified. The survey team's findings sealed under KGB directive. The team leader, a geologist named Dr. Arkady Menin, had been one of the Soviet Union's most prolific geological researchers. For 15 years. After 1979, he published nothing, ever again. In 2003, a team of Russian and German researchers used ground-penetrating radar to survey the substrate beneath the Church on the Blood. The Church on the Blood is the Orthodox cathedral built in 2003, on the exact footprint of the demolished Ipatiev House, on the exact site of the Romanov execution. The Russian Orthodox Church chose this location deliberately. Holy ground above a martyrdom, a consecration of the site, a closing of the wound. The GPR survey found cavities beneath the foundation, extending to a depth the equipment could not fully resolve. The preliminary report described significant subsurface anomalies, inconsistent with natural geological formation. The Russian Federal Geological Agency responded within 3 weeks, declared the anomalies to be historical mining infrastructure from the 19th century Ural extraction period, and closed the survey. 19th century mining infrastructure, with polished walls and geometric markings on every surface, and air that a 23-year-old described as intentional in a letter he never followed up on. For the remaining 33 years of his life, the Ipatiev House was not chosen at random. The Bolsheviks needed a secure site, a defensible structure, a place far enough from Moscow that what happened there could be managed. They chose a house on elevated bedrock, in a city at the geographic spine of the continent. Above ground that had been drawing human attention for centuries. The 1841 German survey, the polished cavity 12 meters across, the level floor, the walls that could not be explained. Somebody built above it, knowing what was underneath, or not knowing, and building anyway, because the ground was solid, because the elevation was good, because the bedrock held, until it didn't.
Here is what the evidence actually tells us.
When you lay it out without mythology, without reaching for answers that aren't there yet. There is a chamber system beneath Yekaterinburg. It predates any construction on the surface above it by an unknown margin. It was built, not formed. The distinction matters. It connects to passages extending deeper into the Ural formation. Those passages connect to something at a depth of at least 340 meters, where processed composite material exists, that no laboratory in 1979 could identify. Every time someone has gotten close enough to document it, they have been stopped, transferred, silenced, or simply never spoken of it again. The pattern is not accidental. You do not pour 40 tons of concrete into a foundation over mining infrastructure. You do not transfer your lead engineer to a location that erases him from the record over a 19th century mine shaft. You do not classify a bore sample under KGB directive over naturally occurring rock. The response tells you what the discovery was, even when the discovery itself has been buried. Today, the church on the blood stands above that site. Gold domes, white stone, candles burning in the nave, pilgrims arriving every morning, the Romanovs canonized as saints, the ground declared holy, the wound officially closed. And beneath it, 40 tons of Soviet concrete in the eastern foundation, radar anomalies that no one is permitted to finish mapping, and at 340 meters, in a sealed classification box in a federal geological archive in Moscow, a bore sample of material that should not be there, in that form, at that depth, in that location. A physical piece of the answer, sitting in a box, in a building, in a city, where they decided long ago that some questions cost more than their worth. Vasily Osin wrote one sentence at the end of his September letter. After the walls, after the floor, after the air that felt like it had been kept there, he wrote, "The other men stopped talking when they walked in. Not from fear. I don't think it was fear. It was something else. Like when you walk into a very old church, and you lower your voice without anyone telling you to. Like when you walk into a very old church, there is a kind of history that gets written in silences, in engineers transferred, in geologists who stop publishing, in survey teams shut down 3 weeks after they begin, in 40 tons of concrete poured into a foundation over something that had no name, in any language anyone standing there knew. Yekaterinburg, 1918. A house above a chamber inside a network inside a mountain range older than almost anything else on this continent. And somewhere in that network, in the dark, at depth, in the waiting, the room that has been there since before anyone built anything above it, the room with the lines on the walls that keep going behind the stone, the room with the air that felt like it had been kept, still there, still waiting. This has been wiped century, the century they edited, the history they poured concrete over. We are still digging.